Welcome to SLA Europe's webinar, Managing the Mental Stresses and Strains of the Changing Work Environment, Where to Turn. My name is Catherine Hertz-Søndergaard, and I am delighted to be introducing today's special guests, Kim Howard and Stephen Phillips. I shall be moderating any questions you might have after the presentations. And I can say today we have Kim on video and Stephen as a call-in. To the main event. We are lucky enough to have two very experienced information professionals presenting this evening. Kim has a background in librarianship and is the founding director of Odonata River Limited, where she has branched out into coaching, mentoring, and personal development, acquiring an impressive range of qualifications in the fields of personal and professional support. Stephen is the founder of SmartIM, providing strategic support for world-class information and knowledge management. He has a strong background in corporate business information services and is both an SLA fellow and a past president of SLA Europe. There should be time for questions afterwards. Please use the GoToWebinar question box, or if you wish to leave an anonymous comment, question, or share a relevant link, please feel free to use the Padlet. A link will be provided in the chat box. And I shall look forward to reading your questions and comments. And now I shall hand straight over to our first speaker, Stephen Phillips.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Catherine. It's a pleasure to be here today with everybody. Kim and I are going to kind of split the next 40 minutes or so between us. And I'm going to be covering some of the concepts, going to be giving an overview of kind of mental health matters, and then Kim will give more detailed and a little bit more kind of personal experience of dealing with and managing mental health situations. So hopefully you'll get a good balance from us as we work through the slides that we've got for you today. So first and foremost, if we can move forward a slide, thank you. Mental health conditions. The World Health Organization basically states that mental health is a state of well-being in which every individual realizes their potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to their community. And mental health can be kind of defined by a whole range of conditions and manifests itself in a whole range of ways within individuals. And actually mental health, it's very important to note, is quite different to mental illness. So mental illness refers to actually a specific diagnosed condition that an individual may have, whereas mental health is a broader term, or mental well-being is a much broader term, which includes some experiences which may or may not actually qualify for a diagnosis. So you can see some of the conditions here, some of which will have diagnosis, like bipolar, like schizophrenia, but then also mental health incorporates things and encompasses things such as anxiety, such as stress, and social anxiety and agoraphobia. Some of these things don't always have a medical diagnosis associated with them. But what's really important to note is that mental health is always changing. It's fluid, and it's often expressed as a continuum on two axes. And if we can move forward to the next slide, Catherine. We've got those expressed here. Now, this is taken directly from Mental Health First Aid England, this slide, and there's lots of material on their website in order to support people in this space in terms of mental health and mental well-being. But as I mentioned, you have two axes here on which mental health is actually measured. The horizontal axis is a medical axis, so you go from the no diagnosis situation where people maybe have a mental well-being challenge, right through to severe diagnosis on the left-hand side, whereby actually something has been recognized and maybe an individual will be likely to be going under treatment for that illness. The vertical axis really looks at or is geared towards sort of social language. So in a scenario, is an individual expressing their mental, the mental health, or demonstrating a strong or poor mental health. And you have, like Gartner has there, kind of a magic quadrant going from the left-hand side, bottom left-hand corner, where you have somebody with a diagnosis of an illness and who generally has poor mental health, right through to the top right continuum, where you may have somebody who's got no mental health or disorder and a very, very positive mental health on a day-to-day basis. So it's important to say that this is, one, it's on a continuum, there are no absolutes, and it changes from day to day. Now, what's been developed over time is also these stigmas that go with mental health and mental illness and mental well-being, and often those stigmas that go with these things, people thinking that people who have poor mental health are, poor performers, or they're not, good people to be within the workplace. Those things can often be a barrier to people's recovery and a barrier to those people becoming successful in their life. So we'll come back to that in a little while. Now, there have been two models that are widely kind of proposed to actually explain how poor mental health develops. And if we can move forward a slide. The first of those relates to Zubin and Spring. And they created something called the stress vulnerability model. And as you can see, this dates from the late 70s. And essentially just trying to explain the line, everybody is typically at one point along that curved line that you see running through the chart here. So the x-axis relates to people's vulnerability. So on the left-hand side, you have people with low vulnerability, so they're typically very resilient, very able to deal with the stresses and strains of day-to-day living. Along to the right, where people are highly vulnerable, not actually able to cope with the challenges that they're being faced with on a day-to-day basis. The y-axis measures stress. So typically what you will find is that people who are very, very or not vulnerable, they've got low vulnerability, high resilience, they can actually deal with a lot of stress day to day and a lot of pressure placed upon them, and they can deal with that very effectively and stay well, typically. However, as you go down the curve and people become more vulnerable, then they can deal with less stress on a day-to-day basis, and then they flip over into potentially into mental illness at that point, or just typically being unwell. So this model, or this curve, really helps to try to visualize how and where people might appear actually on this curve. The second model, if we can move forward, is something called the stress container. So the stress container basically is a vessel into which you can fit all of your pressures, all of your stresses. They come into the container every day, and the container gradually over time fills up. Now, those stresses could be, a number of different things. There could be physical stresses, which might relate to a lack of routine, maybe poor diet, maybe late nights, maybe sort of insomnia, for example. There may be environmental, and obviously this plays in this current situation. Maybe there's poor housing, people deal badly with isolation, perhaps they don't deal well with operating in new environments. There may be also emotional strains there in terms of poor relationships, perhaps some peer pressure, maybe in some discrimination that's being experienced. And then also life events can represent stresses there. So that might be illness, either their own illness or an illness of a friend or a close relative, perhaps even bereavement. Under certain circumstances will create stress, and maybe even things like loss of income or uncertainty around their future will actually be a life event that puts a lot of pressure on people. So as these stresses come into the bucket, into the container, you'll see there at the bottom there's a tap, and this represents the coping strategies. So some people have helpful coping strategies. That might be going out to do some exercise, for example, might be socializing and being with friends, actually or remotely, more often as is the case today. And it may just be around positive thinking, that helps them to actually deal with everything coming into the container, and they can open the tap and let some of those things out, therefore creating more capacity in the container to absorb more stress. However, Some people have unhelpful coping strategies, so they may be working long hours. They may be, again, in isolation, lack of sleep, perhaps there's substance abuse, and by that I mean in the softest term maybe in alcohol, people overconsumption of alcohol, which actually don't make the stresses go away. And then what happens is, as the container fills up and overflows, then more serious problems develop, and again the person may flip over that curve, the Zubin curve, Zubin and Spring curve, into mental illness. So at a high level, this kind of gives you some insights into how we kind of deal, or how models have been developed to explain how we deal with stress. So moving forward onto the next slide, and we'll look at thinking. So, I don't know, Andrew, are you able to move us forward? There we go. So Epictetus was a Greek Stoic philosopher, and he has a couple of quotes here which basically kind of add up to the same thing, which is, you know, events happen, and they will continue to happen on a day-to-day basis. It's not the events actually happening that affect us, but it's actually what we think about those events and the opinions we hold and how we react to those events. And so, as far as mental health and mental well-being is concerned, our thoughts really are vital in building up our resilience. They help us make sense of the world, it influences our feelings, it influences our behaviour, and you know, those experiences that we've had down the years and those thought patterns that we have and those habits that we have been built up, and belief patterns we have been built up over the years. And all of these things then, you know, influence how we react to given situations. There's quite an interesting book from about the 60s by Thomas Harris called I'm Okay, You're Okay, and he postulates parent, adult, child theory for how people react to given situations, and it's quite an interesting read. But thinking distortions, as it's listed here, really are negative thinking patterns that can cause distressing feelings and then prompt the behaviour that maintains or actually reinforces these thoughts. So what does that mean, those thinking distortions mean? What are good examples of those? Well, probably the biggest one there is a negative mental filter. So you focus on the negative that's happening in the world or in your life, and then that colours your view of reality. How does it do that? What does that engender? That means you may disqualify the positive. Somebody calls you up, says you're doing a fabulous job, or you've done a fabulous job and very positive about things, but you may turn around and say, well, oh yeah, that's great, but you're just saying that. Or you're just trying to make me feel better. You know, you actually write off anything positive that actually anybody is giving to you by way of feedback. You might overgeneralize. You might look at something and think, well, one negative event actually represents a pattern of failure that you can see in yourself, and therefore that negative thought begins to overwhelm you again in terms of, well, I can actually never do anything right. I can't, you know, I just can't get it right from the start. Also looking at things like overgeneralization. You may also look to do magnifying and magnifying or minimizing habits. So you may exaggerate the importance of a mistake. You may do a big project or a big piece of work. There may be one single mistake in it or an error, and actually if that you below that edible proportion focus on that one error as a negative outcome and something that impacts others' impressions of you and your performance. Or alternatively, you actually turn it around and actually sort of blame somebody else for making an error when actually there may be somewhere you actually have responsibility for that as well. Ultimately, there's other things like sort of all or nothing, so very black and white, good or bad, perfection or failure, no shades of grey in between, and lack of objective thinking, lack of rational thinking can generally cause all these kinds of thinking distortions that people experience. So, moving on, which is to the last slide that I've got for this section, really is spotting the signs. So here you have not an exhaustive list of all the signs, but some indications of, you know, when stresses are beginning to show, how people are starting to demonstrate or manifest stress in their behaviours. You'll see some physical signs there in terms of things like headaches, stomach upsets, maybe minor illnesses, and perhaps some absence from work, lethargy, constant tiredness, perhaps being run down, lack of care over appearance. I actually had a metric the other day whereby there was a survey, and something like 80% of people have now admitted to the fact that they no longer shower every day because they don't have to go to the office. So I'm not sure whether that says people are just being plain out downright lazy, or they're just trying to save water and do the environment good, or actually is that's something pointing to their mental well-being and not actually taking care of their appearance and looking after themselves. And then other physical manifestations might include sort of sudden weight loss or weight gain also. More emotional, behavioural manifestations too, irritability, short temper, regression, maybe tearfulness, being overly emotional, perhaps being withdrawn, not actually engaging with colleagues and with friends in social situations, or perhaps there's increased arguments or conflicts with others. Again, all indicators that something maybe is not quite right there. We talked about substance abuse. Maybe there's increased consumption of caffeine or alcohol, cigarettes, sedatives, whatever they are. And things, or even small things like indecision, maybe inability to concentrate, perhaps somebody being louder than usual, or maybe more introverted, or less confident than they always be, or perhaps even difficulty remembering things or losing their sense of humour. And then finally, at work, what we might see is increased errors or missing deadlines. Perhaps somebody wanting to be volunteering for everything, taking too much on, overcommitting themselves to their work in a way, hopeless way in which they can't actually ever be successful. And then maybe the kind of the presentism as well. So kind of first in, last out, doing emails at 2 o'clock in the morning. Who hasn't done those? Again, potential signs. And then perhaps again, as I mentioned earlier, a little bit of increased sickness and increased absence. So, at a very, very high level, these are some of the signs, some of the things that you might be looking for in an employee, in a colleague, in a friend that might actually be starting to feel overwhelmed by the situation that they're currently placed in. So that pretty much ends my section, and I'll hand back to you, Catherine, and on to Kim. Thank you.
And I shall hand straight over to Kim. There you go.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And thank you, Stephen, for that fantastic overview of mental health well-being. A lot to process and a lot to take in, and a lot of examples of how we may very easily trip over and sort of get into a state where perhaps we're not as resilient as we could be. So I'd just like to say hello and welcome to everybody that's joined us today. It's a pleasure to be back. I think it was 2018 since I last had the pleasure of speaking with some of you. Very much looking forward to spending this time with you this evening. Just to give you a bit of sense about where I'm coming from, my first career was as a chartered librarian. I used to be head of service for a local authority in music library services. Was very much involved in knowledge management, and now am very much working in the field of personal development and life transitions, including a professional medical coach as well, which I'll tell you a bit more about as we go through. There we go. Lovely. So today I was invited to talk to you about adapting and readapting to the changing work environment, talking about the warning signs, and Stephen has given us a really good overview of what some of those might be. What can we do proactively to minimize stress, and where can we go for some further help and support? So the next slide talks about, before we do anything else, I'd like to do a little exercise with you. There we go. Lovely. So I thought it would be quite nice if we just took a breath before we went any further with the presentation, and just to give ourselves a little bit of a grounding space and some bit of time just to breathe. So I'd like to invite you all just to sit comfortably back in your chair, and sit or stand just with your elbows just slightly back by your side, and just allow your breath to fill your belly and really extend your belly And breathe in a deep breath in through your nose and hold it, and then let it out through your mouth. And this is sometimes known as the box method or the 4-4-7 technique, and it's one that I use a lot with my clients. So I'd like you to, on the count, follow me with the count of 4 in regulating your breathing. So take a deep breath in through your through your nose, for the count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold for 4, 2, 3, 4, and out for 7 through your mouth. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And let's do that again, one more time. In for 4, 2, 3, 4. Hold for 4, 2, 3, 4, and out for 7. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And this is a really helpful technique, and it's called diaphragmatic breathing. This is a lovely exercise to use because it actually helps to calm and center us. It increases the flow of oxygen to our brain. And if we're talking about mental health, we want to calm our brain and just feel grounded and centered again. So it's a really good technique to use whenever you're starting to feel a bit anxious or concerned about something. Just it takes the attention away from whatever is in your thought in your head, and it refocuses you into the body. So it's a really nice technique just to have in your back pocket at any time that you need. Okay, so in terms of what we're going to talk about today, finding our new normal in this very dramatic world. Thank you, Catherine. Adapting and readapting to the changing work environment. You know, we are so used to change, and we can very often feel change fatigue, but we have to remember Heraclius, the only constant in life is change. As a medical coach, when I'm working with my medical clients or people with health issues and crises, you know, they often say, I just want to get back to how life was again. But actually, why would you? Because back there was all the stresses and the strains and the illness and the anxiety, and you would just be going through that same loop again. So we can never go back. It's really important that we think about how we want to be and take control of that and decide the kind of life that we want to have going forward. We have to move forward to survive. And the best way to do that is by adapting and growing and taking the personal responsibility for the life that we want to lead. So finding your new normal, that can be at any different speed. Two people are necessarily going to be the same, but it has to be personal to you. And we'll probably find that our mindset and our way of thinking is going to impact positively or negatively the speed at which we adjust to any new normal in situation. Our personal values may also be challenged in different ways and may need reframing. Some of you may be feeling a whole range of emotion at the moment with the current situation. Maybe you're angry about it. Maybe you're frustrated. Maybe you feel it is not fair. Maybe you feel that the world is not a good place to be at the moment, and you can't get outside, and that's where you love to be. So really thinking about what is it that's challenging you about the current situation and finding a way to reframe it so that you can still move forward with compassion and patience. So this actually is a time of opportunity. It feels scary, I'm sure, and it's a time when everything is being turned on end and we're having to reevaluate what is important to us. But actually that's a good thing, because we actually can take a step back and look objectively to what is important in our lives and for how we want to be in future. So I'm very interested in what are your concerns about whether you are returning to work now that the COVID requirements have lifted a little, or whether in fact you are carrying on working at home and it's kind of like business as normal. What questions or concerns are uppermost in your mind about returning to work? And so I'd like to invite you to maybe use the chat box and give me some thoughts about what are going on for you. Hopefully I'll address some of them today, but if not, we'll have time at the end, and I'll make sure that if there are any outstanding questions by the end of the presentation, we'll follow up with you personally. It might be that you're thinking, actually, do I want to go back to any kind of work right now? Maybe you're enjoying the space and the time to really focus on different things. Maybe it's that particular job you're not so sure about, or maybe it's the specific work environment going back into a situation that may not feel entirely safe. So what has changed for you? What have you benefited from during this time? Have you been able to enjoy more quality time with your loved ones? Has your work-life balance improved? And what is it that you might want to see change as a permanent change to your working practice going forward? What is it that you're most afraid of? And what will bring you the greatest stimulation, satisfaction, and joy? This is a model that is attributed to a Hungarian professor, and we talk about here the cause. It explains both the causes of stress and the difference between good stress and bad stress. So the yellow area here is where the demands placed upon us are greater than our perceived ability to meet those demands. And I say perceived specifically, it's very similar to, as Stephen was saying earlier, you know, we have our own view of the world, our own perceptions about what we're capable of or not. And it may or may not be true, but the perception is that we can't cope or that we're going to struggle in some situation. And when that situation is greater than our abilities, then we have burnout and stress. Equally, the green area here is where we can be, where things are too easy. And we may be bored and there's apathy. And this can also be stressful because we're not stimulating ourselves enough. And that's when we can rust out. So it's very important to remember that stress doesn't necessarily mean to say things are always accentuated and larger than they should be. It could actually be the opposite, that there's not enough energy or something interesting you and keeping you going. So the ideal state is this flow zone through the middle here, where there's a good balance of the demands placed upon us and our ability to meet those demands. And this will, the way that we deal with that is by making sure that we have the skills and the capabilities to work in the way that we need to, that we've got clear, smart goals, that they're realistic, that we know what we're taking on and that we can be they are manageable for the work that we want to do. So being resilient, I've got a definition here. And this is taken from an organization called This Is Thrive Training. And they actually have the world's only resilience questionnaire, which is a fantastic questionnaire. And it's one that I'm going to come back and talk about a little bit later. But for me, resilience is the ability to thrive personally and professionally, even during times of high pressure, change, and adversity. But the good news is that it's not a trait that people either have or don't have. It involves behaviors, thoughts, and actions that can be learned and developed. So we can always do something about our level of resilience. And in terms of a framework, there are three main components here. There's the interpretation of the current adversity and possibility and the future possibility. So how do we interpret what we're actually experiencing at the moment? What do we think? What are we thinking and where it might lead? Are we catastrophizing? Are we being not even looking up and just dealing with the day-to-day? Do we have the capacity for resilience to be able to tackle this adversity? And what action do we need to take to be resilient in the face of it? And so it's very important to remember that mental well-being is very much linked to our emotional well-being. Our emotions affect our thoughts. Our thoughts are based on our beliefs and our values, which in turn create our attitudes. And it's our attitude, our mental mindset, that directs our behavior and our actions. And those behaviors and actions are then interpreted by other people. So we can control all of this chain by starting with our emotions. And so I'd just like to talk a little bit about managing your emotional well-being, first of all. This model here shows you that the vicious loop that you can get into. You know, there's an outside event, something happens, you have a thought, an attitude, a belief, you impose meaning on it. That creates an emotion, first and foremost. And then you go into a behavior that reflects that emotion. And unless you break out of the cycle, you can get stuck there. So a lot of my work that I do with clients is to help them to reevaluate, to reframe, to challenge a limiting belief, to reevaluate their values and give new meaning to those words. I really like this quote. I don't know where it came from, but I am able to control only that which I am aware of. That which I am unaware of controls me, but awareness empowers me. So this is a really useful model that I use, and it's from Stephen Covey's Circles of Concern and Influence. What is within your control? And that's going to be things like your value sets, it's going to be your beliefs, your attitudes, it's going to be your choice of what you wear, whether you have a shower in the morning, it's going to be the way you look after yourself. What is within your influence is about the people around you that you have an influence on or can influence through a persuasive argument. And then there are things which are outside of your control. And the message here is that if it's outside of your control, don't expend energy on it, because it's not going to get you anywhere. It's only going to make you feel more stressed, more anxious. By focusing and drilling in on the things which are within your own personal control, and then you will feel so much better as a result. So one of the things that might be within your control could be the information sources that you're gathering at the moment and what you're drawing on. As information professionals, you're very comfortable with primary and secondary sources of information. I wanted you to think about the internal sources of information that you have along with the external. I'm not making any judgment here, but who do you actually trust for what you are hearing in the media right now about what is true or is not true about this virus? Are you accepting without question government policy, the legislation? Are you relying on what is scientifically proven? You might need to think about who is funding that science. Are you relying on the statistics? Because we know we can always change statistics. Is it common sense? Are you going with the majority view, the minority view? Is your opinion subjective or objective? Is it based on personal experience or something else? And I just think, particularly for us as information professionals, we have a responsibility to protect information and protect the truth. I have to say, it does concern me greatly that there is a lot of people putting very sensible things up on YouTube that's been taken down straight away. Our media is manipulating some of the information that it presents to us to serve a purpose. So if we really want to be in control, if we really want to have the right information to make an informed decision for ourselves about how we stand about things, we have to really think about the information that we're getting and where that's coming from. And that's just the outside, external view. What I'm particularly interested in with my work as a medical coach and as a life transitions coach is the internal view. Okay, so the internalmess information. What information do you trust about yourself? And we all have different preferences for the way that we think. So that might be from the head. It might be our thinking mind, and that's associated with our wisdom. We might feel things in our heart, and that would be compassion. But there's also our guts as well, and that's where we hold our emotions. Our small intestine is where all our emotions exist, and that's where we know what is really true for us and how we feel about situations. And in medical coaching, we spend a lot of time talking to the body, understanding what the symptoms are as they resonate in the body and how they actually manifest themselves. But we also know that every human is creative, resourceful, and whole. So whatever symptom you might be feeling, whether that is, an anxiety in your stomach, or feeling a headache, or just feeling overwhelmed by something and it's giving you toothache, or whatever it is telling you that for a reason. And so we can really listen and tune in to our own bodies to better understand what we need to be resilient. So how do we manage our emotions? What are you actually feeling? So I just give a few thoughts out today about whether you might be feeling overwhelmed, scared, angry, afraid, sad. And it's okay to feel these things. In fact, it's good, because emotions are neither good nor bad. They are purely a form of feedback to us and gives us a pause to consider what might we need to do differently or to think about in order to get ourselves in a more positive space. So as long as you don't get stuck there, it's fine to feel these things. So if you are feeling overwhelmed, limit exposure to the thing that you are feeling overwhelmed by. Set some boundaries. If you're scared, what are you scared of? What do you need to take back control? If you're angry, it's probably a personal value that's been violated. So how can your other values come and support you in that moment of violation? If you're feeling afraid, what positive can you move towards safely? that will give you confidence? And if you're feeling sad, what brings you joy? How can you bring that back into your life? And maybe it's something you can't do at the moment. So, for example, I was saying to Catherine earlier, I'm a violinist in lots of orchestras. I can't play my live music at the moment. And for me, that is a key part of my resilience. So what do I do? I'm looking for different ways to find joy in other things. Contradiction is a really interesting one. Holding two opposing views at the same time is never good for your health. And it could be that on one hand, maybe you recognize that you have one view, maybe your organization has a different view, you're being asked to do one thing, but it might not sit comfortably for you. There's a contradiction there. So it's about finding the best choice for you. And the last one is around sense of loss. And this might not be a person. I sincerely hope that isn't the case, that anybody has lost somebody that they know. But it could actually be a thing. It could be your independence. It could be your freedom, your dignity, a dream, a lost opportunity, loss of confidence. Whatever it is, then please seek professional support to help you to get it back. So this is just something I thought you might like to try at home. It's a very simple technique. And it's called Jinsen Jyutsu, and it's a Japanese technique about balancing the energies in our bodies. And you will see here, you can do it on left or right hand, but each digit of the hand represents a different emotion. So if you're feeling any of these, just gently encircle each finger one at a time for about 3 to 5 minutes. Maybe combine it with your deep breathing and just let the body rebalance and do what it needs to do. So a little summary then of the managing emotions. The most important thing is self-care, looking after you to make sure that you come first. And that means having the ability to regulate your emotions. It's about finding new perspectives, reframing beliefs, using different strategies to manage emotions, and living in hope. Absolutely key. It's about developing a positive attitude and having optimism. It's about celebrating the successes of what's going well at the moment for you, and expressing gratitude. What can you count your blessings for? And asking for help and professional support when you need it. So with the framework, we talked about interpretation, we talked about capacity for resilience. This is the questionnaire model, and there are 6 elements here. I'm not going to go through them all today because we really haven't got time, but if anybody is interested, I've got a few questions for each of these that you might want to request afterwards, and I'd be very happy to send them to you. Purpose and fulfillment is about a life purpose, about your values. The positive mindset is this mental well-being that we're talking about today. Supportive relationships is about making sure that you have the people around you that you know you can go to give you that support in a moment of crisis, or just to have a gentle pick-me-up, or just to share a feeling and an emotion. Having strategies for dealing with problems, managing emotions we've talked about, and as Stephen said, there are unhelpful strategies and helpful ones. And then managing our physiology as well. So when you're going back into the office, thinking about your physiology, what do you actually need to put in place? Think through the process of actually going back into the office. How will you travel? What do you need to feel safe? What do you need to do differently for your own self-care? And I find often when I'm working particularly with clients with mental health challenges, they often assume that people know what they need, but they don't. So it's about telling people what you need is a really important part of the conversation. The fact that we are all socially connected is fundamental. Dr. Ron Siegel has done some really good academic research into connectivity between people. The thing to remember is that we're all in this together, except maybe the Swedes and the Belarusians who weren't in lockdown. But everybody else, we've all been experiencing COVID in much the same way. So therefore, we can empathize with one another and we can support one another to help through. So rather than being wary of one another, connect on a heart level with compassion, because this is the real key to resilience. So what can you do for others? Well, we have to remember that stress affects people very differently in different ways. But what we can also do is we can think about how we normally are when we're operating in a normal environment. I'm a Myers-Briggs type indicator professional and do a lot of work with MBTI with clients. And this is the natural preferences for how we like to live our life and how we like to behave. But when we're under extreme stress, when we're in the grip, we flip over. And these are the very typical things that will stress people out. That is the opposite to how they normally would. So if you know somebody that normally is an extrovert and talking and they go really quiet, that's probably because they're stressing out about something. Similarly, somebody that's really quiet and starting to talk a lot is also a sign of stress. So anything that you can do within your sphere of influence, whether it's at work or personally, to minimize and overcome these potential stresses for yourself and your colleagues, the more we will get back into a balance again. So in terms of what can you do? If you see or hear behavior that you think is out of character or perhaps you deem to be inappropriate, then just notice it. Be curious about why you've noticed it and suspend judgment. Think about that other person. What is it that they know perhaps that you don't know? What are their beliefs and values about the situation currently? How can you hold a safe space for them to express their needs? And if they do identify they need something, how can you help them to attain it? And ultimately, it's about treating others as you would wish to be treated, with patience and compassion. So I remind you again about this model, because for me, I think this is the most powerful one that clients seem to resonate well with. Just thinking about what can I control, what is within my gift, and where do I need some help outside of that. So lastly, I just have a final model for you, which is very much around connecting to nature. A lot of my joy I get from taking regular breaks, going out into the garden, walking in the local park, and it's a fantastic time of year, seeing all the blossom on the trees, it's stunning. But maybe connecting to the 4 elements, to air, earth, fire, and water. And so if your thinking is all up here in the air, and you're kind of lost and ungrounded, then just think, well, what is possible? Maybe you need a bit of earth quality to ground you and say, okay, well, what is true right now? What do I know to be true? Equally, if you've got stuck and you can't shift, and you're just rooted to the spot and you can't move, then maybe you need a bit of water, a bit of fluidity and movement there. And then that might be a question around, well, what needs to be accepted? Equally, it could be, I'm procrastinating, I need to do something, what needs to be done? I need a bit of fire energy. And in that case, it's about quick movements and really thinking about short, sharp sentences and actions that you can do quickly to get you in that mindset of shifting and moving forward. So there's a lot more to this technique, but just as a little summary, I think it's really nice just to go back to the laws of nature and to connect with things that we can see around us and just draw on this as a support for us as we go through. So when you're making a plan, make sure that it's realistic and not overwhelming. Keep it sensible. And if you're trying to shift from A to B, don't try to get there all in one go. Just one little step to shift you along that continuum. So what can you do now just to shift you from one step to the next? Give yourself a specific date. There's a lot of evidence that shows that our subconscious doesn't hear end of the month or whatever. You know, a specific date will mean that you'll be much more likely to hold yourself to account to it. Know how you'll be successful. What will be your reward? And think about what resources do you need to achieve it. So lastly, this is just to summarize, if you're going back to work or you're continuing work, or indeed if you're not working at all, please remember to look after all aspects of you. Establish clear boundaries, whether that's between work and home or different types of work that you're doing. Create manageable routines. This consistency in the framework of that is a great way to stay grounded and on top of what is a very shifting sand. Set meaningful goals, pace yourself, chunk them up into smaller groups. Build in regular breaks. So if we're doing more work on Zoom, make sure you build in a little cushion so that you've got a 5-minute break just to decompress and get up and stretch and look after you before you come back into the next meeting. Stay socially connected. Make sure that you're having your friendships maintained and nurtured for you. Get outside, connect to the earth. Enjoy the therapy of being outdoors. And most importantly, be kind to yourself. So I was asked just to share a few resources of support. You're very welcome to contact me for strategies, techniques, readings, templates, whatever else, services, whatever you might need. But you might like to have a look at these lists as well. The Mental Health First Aid England, both Stephen and I are MHFA practitioners. There's some useful information on there, particularly if you're interested in becoming a first aider as well. All these slides will be available to you at the end of the session anyway, so I'm not going to go into any more detail with them now, but just to let you know that they're there. So finally, just to say thank you for your attention today. I hope this has been helpful. And I just want to move on to one more slide, just to say, remember, your interest is in the future, because that's where you're going to spend the rest of your life. So keep safe, protect your resilience and well-being, and embrace the opportunities open to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Kim and Stephen. That was really interesting. And I can see we have an active Padlet going on with a lot of comments, and I'll feel free to link if you out there have some links you think are useful. We have a couple of minutes for some questions. So I don't know, do we have Stephen with us again?
Yeah, I'm here, Catherine. Sorry, I was just on mute.
Welcome back. And we did have quite a few comments on the things you're talking about. Something I picked up was, for example, presentism. A lot of people mentioned that they do not miss the commute back and forth. And how do you have more to add to that? How you can perhaps talk to your manager, how you as a manager can perhaps dealing with that going forward?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a challenge, isn't it? And in fact, my daughter's working from home right now, and she's very, very paranoid about the fact that her little green light is on in the Skype Messenger, so that her colleagues and particularly her manager can see that she's online and working. But I think the focus, there's a cultural shift going on here now. Enforced on us, I think, by lockdown, and enforced home working, and I think it's more important that people are being judged by what they're achieving and what they're delivering, not by how many hours they're actually spending online. And I mentioned about overcommitting there. I think it's really important. What I have seen and experienced is people want to be seen to be contributing, and if they can, stepping up wherever they can to actually be engaged and demonstrating that they're making a valid commitment. And I just think that that's dangerous. I think you need to be measured. I think you need to think about what you can achieve and what time you have available to do that, and not really lose sight of the fact that you should be judged against what you're delivering and your specific deliverables and objectives that are assigned to you. But that's not always easy. So it's that would be my suggestion. I don't know, Kim, if you'd like to expand on that at all.
I completely agree, Stephen. Yes, and I think the other thing that we're finding is that a lot of employers now, organisations, are very aware that they can work virtually now, and that people may choose to work more flexibly and spend more time at home. In fact, a lot of my clients are in the civil service. I think the engagement scores seem to have gone up by about 6% right across the civil service for managers engaging with staff. But also the requests for more flexible working, to maybe work more days at home, is there too. So I think it's a very natural time to be asking to reevaluate what is going to be a best service, both for the employee and the employer. We all, by legislation, have a right to ask for flexible working anyway. Whether it is permissible or not is at the discretion of the organisation, about whether they feel that the role itself, not the person, but the role itself, would require a physical presence in the office all the time. So yes, we have a legal right, but how that translates in the workplace might be something different. But I spend a lot of time working with people on smart outcome-focused goals, that they're specific, they are measurable, both in terms of quality and quantity, that they are achievable, that they are realistic, and that they are time-bounded. And it's not about piling more and more objectives on. If the good good practice is that there should only be maybe 4 or 5 objectives that any one person has. If you've been given 8 or 9 or 10 or 12, then something has to give, and that's the conversation to have with them.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And I also want to thank you for, I know there was a few people who mentioned that they're being on furlough, which puts you in that situation that you in theory is supposed to come back perhaps by the end of the month, but you don't know if you really are coming back. And I think that's kind of an unsettling situation that's very specific for the current situation.
Very much so, yeah.
So I hope those of you out there could use this this webinar for some inspiration.
I was just going to say, you know, think about your breathing. If you're starting to get anxious about that, obviously we don't know when you're going to be going back, but the self-care piece is really important. So just do some deep breathing. Just be, what will be, and we know the sun will always rise after a dark night.
I'd add to that actually that, you know, in other long-term absence scenarios, and I'm actually thinking about maternity leave, that you know, as an organisation, you know, we have keep in touch days. So I'm really not sure. I mean, not being in a furlough situation, but you know, perhaps to explore and have a conversation about a keep in touch conversation if you've been furloughed, maybe with somebody who's not been furloughed, maybe somebody on your team, maybe your manager, and just say, well, you know, can we have a check-in just for 10 or 15 minutes once a week, just so I can understand kind of what's going on and stay informed, because I think the other situation that people often find themselves in is, you know, you're sat at home, you don't know what's going on. My ex-boss used to have a very quaint saying, I'm going to repeat it word for word, which is, you know, when you don't have knowledge, when you don't know what's going on, you fill the gaps with shit, basically, with bad things. You think bad thoughts. So the better informed and the more communication you can have, and the better you can stay on top of things and then have that understanding, I think that will do a lot for your mental well-being in a furlough situation.
Thank you, and thank you ever so much to both of you. I believe we have reached 7 o'clock. Thanks to everyone who found the time to log in. And I just want to point out, recording of this webinar will be made available on SLA Europe's website. And we would very much appreciate your feedback. It will only take a couple of minutes to respond to the email we're gonna send out in a few days. We have another couple of webinars in the pipeline, and we hope to see you there. And more information can be found on our website. You can also sign up for our newsletter. I will post a link on the Padlet, and there's a really active community going on there at the moment. So thanks once again to everyone, and bye for now.
Bye-bye. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.